Let's recap another week in the NFL. We'll start with headlines. We'll get to best, worst, loss, numbers you should know, and also a new award this week. We start with San Francisco, where it felt a bit like, well, look, this isn't breaking news that the Niners are really good, but they handed Dallas their worst loss in the history of Dallas and San Francisco. If you go back the last couple of years in the playoffs, San Francisco got them in 21. It was a close game. Got them last year by 7 points. If you're Dallas, you're thinking, hey, our defense is really good. I know they're susceptible against the run. They've got Dak. They've got the receivers. Granted, they're down a corner. And by the way, like when you start looking at all the inactives, if you really dig into it every week, you're like, okay, they're down a corner. They're down a linebacker. Like this is where we start to get into the league where it's like, all right, who's going to actually stay healthy throughout all of this? So a lot of stuff we think we know about these teams doesn't mean that the teams go better or worse. It means some stayed healthy and some didn't. And it's just so important to remember that when teams start doing stuff we didn't expect off the first 5 or 6 games. But with San Francisco, they're healthy and they're nasty. And it was pure domination. It was domination against humiliation. Physical play, whether it was up front, but I think a lot of the physical play from that front that the Niners have invested in heavily. And when they tell the story about Lynch going to ownership saying, we got to get Hargrave, we needed another difference maker. He said he'd had this speech they'd practiced 10 times. I thought that was really cool storytelling on the broadcast with Collinsworth and Tirico last night. But it also speaks to like when a team has somebody who's already terrific in Bosa, they're like, let's put somebody else next to him that we think is a difference maker too. With Hargrave, and Philadelphia has invested so much that they probably weren't going to spend it on him. But you just get the point. I think some of these teams that are really good, we're like, nah, we're good. Let's not make a strength even stronger. And they did that. They played a lot of man coverage in the secondary, forced Dak into a lot of mistakes. And I know that Dallas was coming in feeling like this is a bit of a statement about whose defense was better. Not much that we have to worry about that anytime soon. Let's look at San Francisco's defense is now allowing 13.5 points per game. That's number 1 in the NFL. By comparison, Denver is last. They're allowing 36 points per game. The Fred Warner triple crown last night, the pick, the forced fumble, and the sack on Dak. I want to talk about that sack because I lost it at home watching it and then replaying it. Warner starts at like the 15-yard line and decides after like realizing that anything else that was a priority is okay, that he's like, no, actually, I'm going to go after Dak now. And he decides to run straight at him and goes from the 15 to like the 3 or 4 yard line and sacks him that close to the end zone. Dak actually pump fakes him. And you know how many times you watch on Sundays where you're like, that quarterback's about to get killed. And then these guys are such sick athletes that it's just a little shoulder turn. It's a little slip of the hips. Just a one step outside, and this 250-pound defensive player just isn't agile enough to stay with the quarterback. Fred was like, nah, I got you. We're good. Look, it's not going to happen because sacks and interceptions are sexier stats, and we are in an all-time run with the NFL between TJ Watt doing what he's doing every week, Garrett. I know Micah didn't have the impact that you would have thought last night, but once the score happens, like Micah didn't have the normal Micah Parsons game, and Trent Williams, if you look at the 8 matchups against them, 4 were double teamed. So I don't know what those mean, but Trent won the battle. If you look at the amount of effectiveness that either had against each other, tackling an edge guy. But linebackers are a bit like running backs. And I'm talking like the guys that line up on the inside where Fred can do anything. Fred Warner can literally do anything at that position. And the inside linebackers are somebody that were just like, oh, those guys are any good. I don't blame the NFL for necessarily doing that. But when you look at the Defensive Player of the Year odds last night, I think Fred Warner was like plus 5,000. We should check it again today. I know that he's not going to because there's just so many nasty edge guys, and one of these dudes is going to end up putting tons of numbers. But Fred is like almost being discounted because he plays a position that normally isn't as impactful, despite being the most impactful guy that does it. So I've long loved Fred. And there you go. The offense didn't even really need McCaffrey against a run defense that we knew was a little weak in Dallas. Jordan Mason, who had 7 touches all season, goes 10 for 69. And then you're looking at Brock Purdy right now, who leads the NFL in QBR. He's got 0 picks. He was the only question mark on a team that I absolutely loved. In the beginning of the year when I picked him to win the NFC, I was like, I guess I'm going to do this. And I wouldn't ever do it with Brock Purdy at quarterback for any other team in the NFL other than a Shanahan team. And this is after he had the elbow surgery to reconstruct the thing. And this team spends their 27th in cap spending on a quarterback, which means they've done that good of a job spending it everywhere else. You have your free quarterback window, and the Niners are making other teams paying for it, despite their free quarterback now having 0 picks, the highest QBR, and 10-0 to start his career, 5 off of Roethlisberger's 15-0 record. The other headline from yesterday, Cincinnati's 2-3. And we finally had the great Burrow-Chase game, or just a special one, because Chase went crazy. 15 catches, 192 for 3 touchdowns. This is much more like we'd expect. This Burrow calf thing is a good enough excuse for me, because he's been awful. It was weird because I was watching a lot of Bryce Young yesterday, and Carolina's lost to Detroit. Detroit looked great again, by the way. And Carolina didn't. They're 0-5. And everything with Bryce, he's hurried. He's making mistakes I wouldn't expect him to make. But when I was watching him play, because I really wanted to spend more time on Bryce Young this week, I was like, man, everything's short. Like, everything is so short with him. So I don't know what's necessarily going on there. And so I was like, let me look up some of the air yard stats. Let me look at some of the basic stuff, the yards per attempt. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, oh, exactly what I expect. Out of 34 qualifying quarterbacks, Bryce Young is 33rd on yards per attempt. You want to know who was 34th? You want to know who was last going into this week? Joe Burrow. But it makes sense if you've watched them. It's been a mess. We've talked about it a bunch of different times. Was it weather? Was it the calf? Was it they've adjusted? T. Higgins is out in this one. Arizona is actually more competitive than certainly I thought. Although it got a little ugly there later in the game with Dobbs making some big mistakes. But, Burrow at 4.5 yards per attempt going into this past weekend, that's half of where he was off of 2 years ago. Still a massive drop-off from wherever. So maybe it's the defense, maybe it's the O-line. I just couldn't fathom that Cincinnati was going to actually just be a bad football team this year, despite the cycling in and cycling out of playoff teams that we have in this league all the time. It was 24-20 in the fourth against Arizona, too. So it's not like they just showed up and blew them out. There's a study. Maybe I shouldn't say study. I don't know if there was a federal grant with this. There are numbers that tell you how hard it is for the 0-2 teams to make the playoffs. Since 1999 through last season, only 11% of teams have started 0-2 and made the playoffs. I do wonder sometimes if that's a flooded stat, if there's actually just too many 0-2 teams that are going to go 0-2 because they stink and everybody's healthy. So there's no talent gap makeup because you're healthier than maybe the team that's always better than you. So whenever I look at that, it always reminds me of like baseball stats. Early 2000s kids look it up. There was just all sorts of stuff that just told you there's no such thing as clutch. And I was like, well, is there no such thing as clutch, or are we looking at so many numbers that are baked into this that there's nothing that's really that much of an outlier? So I'd wonder, the real question would be, okay, well, how many of those 0-2 teams had Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase? That's kind of my point. I think that stat gets weighted down by so many teams that would just suck that the 11% scares the hell out of you when you're a fan base. It's like, yeah, but do they have a generational quarterback and a generational receiver? And they've had like a couple good seasons as opposed to one fluky one. And we're going to find out about Cincinnati because they've got Seattle against that, what I think is an incredible secondary, the Niners, and then the Bills, who we'll get to their health issues in a bit. The last headline is just Philadelphia at 5-0, plugging along. They're probably dealing with a little bit of the Niners shadow now, especially after last night in a prime timer Sunday night against Dallas. Some of the numbers here will tell you, well, where is Philly? Are we holding them to the standard of everyone else in the NFC? Then you should feel really good. Are we holding them to the standard of Philadelphia of last year that lost only 3 games in the regular season when kind of punted on a couple of them anyway? Well, they're 10th in yards allowed this season, 13 in opposing points per game. They were number 2 in yards allowed per season, but 8th in points per game. But seriously, the points per game are basically the same. So dropping from 8 to 13 would sound like a good tease or a cool headline to get you to click on something. Actually, I don't think I click on that. But the point is there's almost no difference whatsoever. And the yardage thing, yeah, it's a little off. Now, if you had a college football resume deal where you were debating Philadelphia against the Niners, you go, okay, is the Rams win the best win so far for Philadelphia? It probably is, because I actually think the Rams are pretty good. They got Cooper Kupp back. He had a decent day. And that was a game. That was like a real game where the Niners have the Rams win as well, also at L.A., but then the Cowboys win. None of this matters. I don't even know why I did it, but I did it because I'm probably going to do it later on in the season when we have more evidence. I started looking at Hurts. Okay, a little more interception happy at the beginning of this year than maybe last year. Is he throwing the ball a little bit more? Are they showing that they're trying to develop him? I asked myself that question. 168 pass attempts through 5 games this season, 160 attempts through the first 5 games last year. So no, not really. The point is this. I don't really care that it hasn't been like perfect every single week because Philadelphia can do something that very few teams in the league can do. If the Hurts Devontae thing or the Hurts A.J. Brown or, watching them have Swift and then go like, wait, they got him too on top of everything else. And he has moments where it looks like he's breaking away. They can decide to kind of just take your soul from you physically with their run game. They did it against Minnesota where it was like, I guess we'll just do this. They can pivot like very few teams can. If they feel like one part of their attack is not working, they can go to the other one, combining that with Hurts being unstoppable on all this short yardage stuff, although they did get stuffed once yesterday late. That was a big deal. But they had a 15-play drive that went 8.5 minutes against the Rams. They had another 17-play drive that went 8+ minutes. Shout out to Red Zone, by the way, which I think is way crispier this year, the crispiest it's ever been with Scott Hansen. They have absolutely stepped up their game. They're not giving us a 40-10 third down from the team that has 10 points late in the game just because they're in the fucking red zone. We are getting the important downs, not necessarily in the red zone. We can call it that, but I want the brand to be, give me the plays that matter. And I think the Red Zone channel has done that better this year than ever before. So yeah, they're hitting a new peak. Little aside. But Philadelphia, there's just, when I watch them play out their game plan, I just love that they can go, you know what, actually, we're going to go to this, and we're still going to be in control of this thing. So that's still kind of scary, despite not the headline, the impressive headline, or just the visual of watching what San Francisco did against Dallas last night. Numbers you should know. You don't have to know them. You get through the week, but here you go. Some next-gen stuff here to start. Purdy threw 4 touchdown passes outside of the tackle box last night. That's the most in an NFL game this season. He actually leads the NFL with a completion percentage of 72.1% on balls traveling 10-plus air yards. So whenever I look at the air yard stuff, it can be a little confusing, but there's a lot of quarterbacks where you can find a stat for a guy you like that makes him look good, and you can find a stat that makes him look bad if you don't like him. There's just a lot of stats out there. But one of the things that doesn't really lie is, like, are you getting some air under your throws? This is not just turning and pivoting to McCaffrey. They move the pocket around. The stuff they did with Kittle last night was terrific. But there's some Purdy stuff that keeps happening here where I'm like, man, like that's not some weird, like, he's doing that. Despite him admitting even last night during the production meeting, as they shared on the broadcast, he's like, I know I don't have the biggest arm strength. We are, I don't know if there's a T-shirt to be made or something, but maybe there needs to be some kind of movement about still keeping an open mind about college quarterbacks without great arm strength. Alex Highsmith, linebacker, Pittsburgh, 14.5 sacks last year. So this isn't new, but he's kind of in the TJ Watt shadow deal. He had 11 pressures just in the game against Baltimore. That's number 1 for any player in an NFL game this season. Also leads the NFL, unless it changed late last night, with 30 pressures on the season. The Pats, a number you should know, consecutive 30-point losses for the first time since 1970. That's old. It's a long time. We have a new award season here. This one is called the Bill Simmons Immediate Career Assessment Award. This is new, so I'll let you know the origin of this one, and then I will hand it out. So I was doing a pod with him years ago, Saquon Barkley in the league. I think it was Saquon's second season, or we were getting ready for a second season, and he was like, Saquon Barkley is the best running back in the history of the NFL. It's like, wow, that's a really high ranking. I personally would need a little bit more, but 2 people in my life have never assessed careers quicker, Bill and, of course, my father. My father can watch a guy give up 1 hit out of the bullpen, been in the minors for 10 years. He'll call me and go, this guy doesn't have the stuff. I'll be like, okay, that's amazing. He faced 1 batter, and you already know. So the reason I bring this up is I'm having a little fun with it because I have my own standards. I have my own rules. But Devin A. Chan now, is he the second best running back in the NFL? It feels a little quick. To go that way. Clearly, McCaffrey's 1. Bijan, I know I'm already going to get pushed back. Be like, well, wait a minute. It's too soon for Bijan, but it's not for Achane. Yeah, that seems ridiculous. Miami has the 5 fastest single plays in the NFL this season, and it's 3 different guys, Mostert, Hill, and Achane. He's filthy. If he's not 2, he's 3. I feel comfortable with 3. I don't even like doing this. I never do this. I'm never this guy. It's unfair that Miami has him. Like, they didn't even need him. He's so good. And he's, like, complete, too. Now, have I really dialed into his blitz pickup? No, I haven't. So I'll keep an eye on that as well. Little early for me to go ahead and proclaim that this early into October and into his career and the slow start, and he had missed a game with a shoulder injury, but he's filthy. Okay, best win. Niners. Yep, that'd be an easy one. Let's pretend we're going to give it to somebody else maybe. Houston. Well, they lost, so that doesn't make it to. But for a little while, it felt like it was going to be a nice one. Right? CJ, rookie quarterback, coming down, getting you the game-winning touchdown drive. But no, Desmond Ridder, who's going through his own stuff as a young QB. The best game of his career. So now instead of Houston being 3-2, Atlanta's 3-2 after scoring just 13 points combined the last 2 weeks. That's still not my answer. Jacksonville beating Buffalo in London. If there is, as I presented for years, the primetime theory of analysis that when you're a bad quarter, like when you have the bad quarterback game on a Monday night game or now a Thursday night game or the Sunday night game, that's like having 4 bad games because everybody just watched that one. The opposite of that is the 9 a.m. London window. If you're going to lose and have a shitty game as a quarterback, do it over there and do it at that time. Where even the guys listening right now, you're telling your wives, you're like, no, it's not just from 1 p to like 11 o'clock at night. I got to be ready to go at 9. West Coast guys are like, no, I got to be ready to go at 6. Tougher sell. Because if you're going to get anything, if you're going to go to a state fair, you're probably going to have to do it before those 1 o'clock kickoffs on the East Coast. So they held the Bills to just 7 points through 3 quarters. The Bills, by the way, lost Milano for the season. Daquan Jones got a pec tear, so that doesn't look good. Already lost Tre'Davious White, so that scares me a lot for Buffalo there. I could toss it up to just, hey, they went to London. Jacksonville needed it more. They're feeling themselves after the Miami win. All those things, it's fine, but the injury thing matters way more. But now Jacksonville's sitting there at 3-2. Lawrence is basically on pace to be the same guy statistically as last year. The defense for Jacksonville, they gave up 358 yards per game this season, 357 last year. The points are a little bit less. So they're kind of the same. And if you think about it, the Houston loss made us go, wait, what's up with this team? They caught Kansas City in week 2, although they were great defensively against them. Week 2, after Kansas City had lost the opener, so they were going to be a little bit more dialed in. But I think Jacksonville should just feel really good because the 3-2 win against the Bills team that we know should still be good, that has to be the best win. Worst loss, Baltimore. They'd given up 3 points through 3 quarters. Then it's a safety and then a field goal possession after the safety. It's still 10-8. And then Pittsburgh fumbles a punt return. So Baltimore has the short field, and Lamar tries to go the one-on-one route throw with Odell, where I don't know if that's on Odell. I don't know if that's too much trust by Lamar. I don't know if it's like, hey, you can't throw a pick here. You can't throw a pick, make it at least make it a touchdown for them, not a 2-score game because it would have been 13-8. Instead, they throw the pick, and then Pickens gets a 41 yards touchdown catch. It looked like Pickett was just like, I'm going to start throwing it to Pickens here. I'm just throwing it to him. And it was actually working. Pittsburgh pulling this one out is incredible. So you could say it's a bad loss there for Baltimore, but at least it was competitive because, again, the worst loss in the NFL is New England Patriots. Matt gets benched again. Their last offensive touchdown was scored in the second quarter of week 3. The stadium started emptying out towards the end. We've covered the awful drafts by Belichick, the terrible free agency spending, the coach stuff that Sando brought up, where Sando was talking to people around the league and was like, the reason Bill did what he did last year with the coaching staff was essentially he doesn't want to have to retrain coaches to understand his way. Well, it made me think about that a little bit more as they sort of figured it out, but he still went back to the well with guys that, meanwhile, the rest of the NFL is trying to find the next hot shot play caller who understands quarterbacks and understands offenses. And by the way, for the most part, it's been an overwhelming success. The rest of the league is doing that. Bill's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the opposite. And I started thinking about Saban because Saban and Belichick can compare to each other so much. And granted, they work together Um, there's a long history there, a long amount of respect. But like Saban loses a coordinator every single year. Imagine if Saban's like, well, I just got to bring back John Parker Wilson because he gets me. Shout out to JPW. I still owe him $100. But this is getting, it got so bad that I actually went to Pats.com to watch the video. The Pats.com highlights for the recap of that game, not abundant. There was like, hey, look at Davis's 24-yard game. Like that was the first highlight video to click on for an NFL game. So I don't do this very often, but I dialed it up. I started watching the post-game presser. Belichick walks right in, and he got annoyed at the angle of the mics, started turning them all down. The NFL Network mic falls out of the middle, so he just put it on the ground, which is why the audio was terrible on top of him not being in the best mood. And it was interesting because he said, "Does he need to start over?" And then one reporter was like, "Well, have you ever started over before? Like, what does that entail?" He's like, "Yep. Because it was a great follow-up. Because it was actually Belichick giving us something. It was him giving us something when he refuses to ever give any of us anything. And then there becomes this kind of like debate of like, what does he owe you? Like, hey, you were terrible. Back-to-back weeks. Repent. Answer our questions. He wouldn't even look at anybody after he took the mic down, which, I'm just watching. Being like, all right, figures. But him saying, I'm just going to start over. I was like, the irony of that. If this keeps going the way it's going, he may not be in charge of the starting over.